Very warm welcome to all participants for the webinar series titled Technology and Innovation Pathways for Societal Inclusive Growth. This is the platform where we bring in thought leaders from industry to share their perspectives on industry trends, waves, and disruptions. As part of this, we are extremely glad to have Mr. Arun Satyanarayana, Head of Strategy Programs, Customer Experience Transformation in TPG Telecom, Australia, to deliver a talk on disruption as a catalyst for transformative innovation. Arun is a seasoned thought leader with over 29 years of expertise, transformation, platform modernization, M&A, and customer experience strategy and transformation. His focus of experience across telco and for analytical thinker, Arun leads with influence, partnering and collaborating across teams and guiding transformation through insight, structure, and vision. Very warm and over to you.
Thank you so much, Rajaji, for that amazing introduction. I couldn't have done that job better. Hello to everybody, and really nice to meet you all. And thanks to Tata Elxsi for this opportunity today. Probably reflecting to Rajaji's introduction, I really wanted to take this opportunity to really deep dive a little bit from the context of not only just the Australian market, but I think more so in telco, there is more opportunities growing, not only from the way the transformation agenda is actually creating a disruptions within the telco environment, but that is also a clear opportunity for organization to look not only to build their strategy around transformation, but also create opportunities for innovation. So that's the topic we're going to cover today. But before actually I deep dive, I'll again probably subtitle this, right? So if you look at today's content, probably 50% of the content was generated using Microsoft Copilot. And why not? Because one of the key topics I really want to actually deep dive into is Gen AI, agentic AI, but also what is the actually opportunity both at a personal level, but at an organizational level using AI. So I thought it would be a good way to actually bring that content across. Before we deep dive a bit, firstly, I want to begin today by acknowledging the Darmughal and the Daru people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on and from where I am privileged to be able to present to you all today. So I pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and the Torres Strait Islander people here who might be listening to this webinar. So without further ado, thank you for everything. Going into the agenda today, again, not really very focused on every solution possible, but the opportunity here, what I'm trying to explore today is that as more and more transformation agendas are coming across the organization, what does that disruption really looks like? And the disruption I'm referring to is not what exactly translates into innovation. It's about what actually is the chaos that actually evolves as a result of a transformation agenda and starts disrupting the business, but also how it actually impacts people. So how can you actually start to think from that context? Second thing is more and more digital transformation has been very much focused also from driving customer experience. What does that changing in dynamics really looks like? And then more sort of some real life examples of where AI in telco space, more so from an Australian perspective, are the opportunities that actually have already evolved or is evolving. So let's actually jump to a key topic that is really probably something that I've been very key upon is transformation as an agenda. And again, just for context for everybody here, I think I've been doing various different transformation agendas for more than now 15 plus years, having led nearly 5 plus big transformation agendas spanning more than 2 years. What you will actually see, and this is again a data that actually I had read through both McKinsey and through Gartner is you will see that McKinsey says that 70% of business transformations fail. And then on the other side, Gartner is actually estimating 80% of those failures are for organizations trying to make it more digital. The flip side to this is if you look at what exactly is happening within the space now, more and more CEOs are actually engaging to see how do they actually bring not the digital disruption and the transformation, but embracing AI, which you essentially see that 61% of CEOs are really keen to explore what AI actually offers to them as a business. Secondly, there is a very heightened opportunity that more and more organization is looking is that what does return of investment investing into AI looks like? And if you see 25% of the initiatives that are basically starting to shape up in organizations are very much driven to actually drive the ROI. Again, telcos, we are not a telco business unless we actually talk about devices. We are talking about by 2025, there are already 52 billion connected devices compared to 2020. And then the 5G global reach is talking about going to nearly 80% of the population. But then at the same time, there is evolution of 6G and then the amalgamation of edge computing and then also the innovation essentially as an opportunity. So that's the context really wanted to really drive today is that on flip side, many transformations fail. On the other side, you have all these opportunities from a technology and innovation, which in turn drives disruption. So one of the key examples I wanted to really focus is 2023, most of the telcos basically lost a big revenue margin, which was when SMS was replaced by WhatsApp and other messaging apps. Now, is this lost opportunity something that actually many telcos replaced with? Not really, because now the reliance was more about finding new opportunities. So let's take another next example, right? And this is probably a bold statement for me, is a lot of organizations, more so telcos, went through in the last 10 plus year digital transformation. In today's context, I think digital transformation is more or less dead, where now the focus is what does an AI-led transformation and innovation really looks like. So if you look at 2025, which is MBB, so you have McKinsey, Bain, BCG, when they have actually done some research, what it actually is talking about is that more and more companies are trying to now drive transformational strategies to actually integrate AI into their operating model, which does require you need your core infrastructure to be probably more cloud native, but also looking at what does then customer centricity translate into? Because we have been governed within the digital transformation space wherein customers have to actually take actions to basically drive a customer journey. But with more and more tools evolving, be it ChatGPT and other tools, now actually digital agents are the customers who are doing that job on behalf of your real consumers. So the whole context of the interaction is itself completely changing, which also means that organizations actually have to now heavily invest into talent and capability building. Again, there is a flip side to it. When we have already gone through all these digital transformation and various different journeys, an effective transformation, while it is going to add to financial performance, it will basically add value to the organization, both from ARPU and revenue and margins. On the flip side, more and more organizations, the biggest challenge for them is to actually embrace change, which is building the culture of change within the organization. So if you take that step away, right, and this is literally now probably a reflection of last, I will say, give or take 10 plus years, wherein when digital transformation was the focus, more and more was two key pillars that most organizations focused on. One is growth, which is your revenue growth, upgrading your networks from the old technology we had from moving from 2G to 3G to 4G, and then now move to 5G. more and more data and insights. How do we actually use data and insights to actually leverage that, not only from retention and basically managing churn, but actually creating new customer experiences. But on the other side, you had more and more focus on operational efficiency, which is around, are we fully utilizing our assets in the right way? How agile and nimble are we when it comes to operational efficiency? What are the new business models we can actually try to actually bring more process efficiency? But I think this is where many of the digital transformations also actually sort of failed, right? Is that it's not that they didn't actually achieve from digitalizing the journey. Where it actually failed is the aspect is that the transformation agenda focused on the layers of, I guess, themes, which was more driven on modernizing the platform. So we did achieve platform modernization, but we didn't really try and tackle on what does that actually translate into from an efficiency aspect of it. And I think this is probably the most amazing opportunity, I think, from the AI use case that actually presents for telco, is how do you actually drive not only change within the organization, but using AI models, not only just generative AI, but agentic AI and AI agents essentially as a model to build into your operating model for assisted efficiency. And then that essentially translating into your return of investment and hopefully actually adding to the cumulative ROI. Let's explore a bit more, right? And I think this is probably a problem statement most people have really focused on, is that telcos in general, more so, I think, again, I'm speaking more from an Australian demographic now, but I think it is general principle that is applicable across the world. Old business models very heavily relied telcos providing services more from voice and then add-ons as data and other things, right? Whereas now more and more telcos essentially are becoming utilitarian. And what I mean by that is most of the consumers, when they want to interact with telco, they are by default expecting that you will provide me a seamless experience when it comes to connectivity. The focus is now on quality of service and then value-added service. Whereas most of the organization, when previously focused on, it was the old business models. So if you look at many of the use cases that as a transformed organizations, most telcos have focused on is you have various transformation agendas that was either digital-led enablement, IT delivery model changes, technology simplifications, or from a customer experience perspective, bringing customer centricity or using data to actually drive customer experience and then monetize on that. Or you had larger organizational transformations, which was cultural aspects of it, or leadership, or organizational restructure. And then more so in the international market, ESG target goals is quite important. Sustainability is another focus area, or especially more so around the carbon footprint. And then you have overall operational efficiency, productivity, and simplification. Now, why I really wanted to focus on this is, if you look at it, all the whys are not changing, but what is actually changing is now opportunities for actually using a different approach in what and how we actually solve for these problems. So what you're actually seeing on the screen essentially is the opportunities that I've actually tried to highlight is the opportunities that actually is presenting for the organizations to actually use these levers now. So the why doesn't actually change, but it's more about what are the opportunities we can actually use to now scale, to invent and innovate when it comes to AI. Let's take a step back, right? And I think many people would have experienced this. So this is a typical transformation agenda. So I will give one example of it. Most recently, I was actually part of a digital transformation agenda. What essentially translated into is there is a centralized COE team which is driving the transformation. But if you look at it, there are various parts of the business that needed to be part of it. Overall outcome that the transformation agenda is trying to achieve: revenue, increase in revenue, optimize the business, drive efficiency, ultimately, hopefully translating all of this into a better defined customer journey and hence a transformed organization. But if you look at it, and visually that's what I try to represent here, is that the challenges in these sort of transformation is, again, this has been an old school model that basically has always evolved and actually has worked for many organizations, is you have a central COE team trying to drive a transformation agenda. And then you have various parts of businesses. At points in time, they are directly engaged. At points in time, they are not engaged. But there are also silos of organization who have no role to play in bringing the transformation to life. But when things start to fail, the people who actually were not directly involved are probably have the highest role to actually play. Now, why am I really deep diving into this is, and I've reflected a lot about this in the more recent conversations I've actually been part of, is adoption of AI. It's going to be very challenging because you cannot have this mindset wherein you have a central focus. It needs to be more from a distributed focus. So imagine essentially a visualization of the same problem statement, but now actually you're focusing about innovation. And innovation doesn't necessarily has to be something brand new, something snazzy. It can be as simple as today you were basically using your chatbot interactions with some of the automations that was then basically efficiently driving to your contact center via email. What are all these use cases? How can various parts of the organization actually not only explore but experiment with AI essentially as an innovation and a model, but ultimately actually translating the organization into a capable organization, which is giving learning opportunity for people, but at the same time, you don't end up with a siloed mentality. Instead, what you are now doing is taking the same problem statement, but instead actually focusing on building capabilities across the organization. The transformation team as a centralized or a COE function still can actually exist. But now what you're actually focusing about is how can all these pilots and various different innovation possibilities are coming together to now transform the organization, but you are now monetizing on the investments. Now, let's jump to a theme, and I'll be upfront here. So this is actually a slide, as I was giving an example, that actually I got Microsoft's Copilot research to actually help me quantify what does actually AI adoption in telco would really look like. And there shouldn't be any surprises here, because what you would actually already see is that, again, this is more focused on Australian telcos. On one side, the research is actually saying that agentic AI is already used by many telcos, or they have already decided to invest into AI. And most of the focus from an agentic AI perspective is around efficiency and productivity. The why, again, has not changed if you look at it, which is how do we reduce churn, increase ARPU, revenue and margins. But what you would actually find very interesting and what stands out as a problem statement in general is that if you look at the key bolded statements I have actually presented here, these are not new problems that we are trying to solve. So while AI adoption is essentially an opportunity, hyper-personalization was still a problem we are trying to solve. Increasing in ARPU was still a problem we are trying to solve. Increasing productivity and efficiency is still a problem that was not something new. Or better service delivery models, or actually having better customer service structure in place. But what actually is the opportunity is that generative AI on one side can actually help even people like me who can actually use this to actually understand the various different data as insights and then translate those insights into something more tangible. Or building agentic AI models, which is how do you actually extend all the automations that you already developed to be a bit more autonomous in the decision making. So you are not always purely reliant on human interaction, but actually building an operating model which is both autonomous in its nature, but actually the decision making is also essentially part of your operating model. But then on the other side, you have AI agents, which again, if you look at more and more telcos, what's one of the biggest challenges they have is cost. total cost of ownership continues to be a big issue for most telcos, primarily because you're investing more into building the infrastructure, but then on top of that, maintaining that infrastructure. And then on top of that, you have your outside of your BSS and OSS is all the platforms that you need to integrate to actually seamlessly provide a customer all the services required. So let's take some examples that actually came across. So if you look at it in the global arena, you have AT&T, T-Mobile, NTT Docomo, Vodafone, Deutsche Telekom. They're all actively already deploying Gen AI or agentic AI to actually reimagine how their current operations works. Then you have more and more startup, if I want to actually call it, or telcos who are new and upcoming, using agentic AI essentially as the way to build a business. So which means that many of the telcos are already using it or are in the early stages of actually adopting it. But if you see more and more in the global arena right now, AI native telco is something that is more a predominant messaging, wherein you have sort of the shedding this old legacy model. And I'm not saying that these are organizations who are just completely new. These are organizations who are already heavy hitting, big organization, but they are carving out an organization more as a startup to basically become more AI native, starting fresh. So if you look, another interesting insight, and that this is an article I was reading on Carney's global analysis. And what you will find very funny is more and more telcos are actually evolving to be adopting AI. And if you look at this data, the telecommunication media technology industry has the highest percentage of AI leaders compared to other industries. And I want you to remember this because there is a flip side of the conversation as well, which I want to talk about. But it is a very interesting side that in one side, telcos are actually an early adopters, and there are more leaders within telco who are actually wanting to be diving deep into the AI innovation. So let's actually jump a little bit more on the shifts. Now, this is something both my experience and then with Microsoft Copilot research, I basically summarize this, is if the problem statements are not changing, which is growth is key, we want to actually disrupt the market to actually create more revenue opportunities and margins, and as a result of that, a better customer acquisition model. What exactly is required is people's mindset within the organization, because the customer needs are already changing every day, but then a change in the adaptive leadership. So if you look at that essentially as the key mantra and how you actually start to shape up as an organization, it is very imperative that you need to start upskilling the people. So it's one thing to actually adopt a new AI tool or some new fancy tool. How do you actually upskill your people so that if you are implementing, let's say Microsoft Copilot, it's going to be as good as how good somebody is at actually generating the right prompt. Because ultimately, whatever data it is sourcing is based on what's available as internet. So rather than me browsing internet for hundreds of articles, it's now somebody else doing that job for me. There are other opportunities, which is more about building this mindset, is that AI cannot be seen as somebody's taking job away, but it can actually help if the right operating model is built up as essentially boosting the AI efficiency, which is more about assisted productivity. There are other increasing opportunities that it will create for collaboration and problem solving. From a leadership perspective, as I said, that I think that adaptive leadership is quite key, because leaders now actually also need to shift their mindset in how problem solving is done at a team level, but how we are actually adopting AI from an orchestration model perspective. But on the flip side, and this is definitely a flip side, because as much as technology evolves, and we have already seen this in more and more countries around the world, including Australia, where you have seen this is the amount of spam and how actually these tools are used to scam people. So you will need to be very conscious on where and how you are using these tools and build a structured governance model, a structured ethical model in how you are actually investing into these tools. But not last but not the least, one of the challenges is always going to be is that how do the customers then actually experience this? Because for them, it needs to be very seamless. If you look at customer experience, and I'm probably going to annotate it very basically, right? Because as a customer, what I want is I want what I want, when I want, and how I want. As long as you can actually deliver those services which I'm asking for in that context, as an experience, I'm very happy. And the best customer experience, if you look at it, is no experience. And what I mean by that is, if your quality of service is so good that I don't need to call you, it's the best customer experience. I'm going to be brand loyal to you. So I think that's, again, a change in thinking. Second thing is, especially with the way evolution of technology and more recently, the amount of scams that have actually evolved, people are losing trust in telcos. Why? Because if you look at the spams they experience, it's because either somebody's calling them and trying to scam them through, or there is an SMS they have sent and they are trying to scam them through. So it's not that the telcos are directly engaged in it, but then the trust essentially comes from the fact is consumers are actually wanting telco to take the accountability to actually stop that behaviors. Now, if you take that essentially now as a problem in across how internally you look as an organization, what is the leadership mindset that is required, and then how you actually translate that for customers. This is, again, me being very preachy from my personal experiences. What works for you as an organization might be different. But at the same time, these are quite generic in nature, but these are not industry specific. Because customer experience is going to be a problem to solve for many organizations. It's one thing to actually modernize your platforms or implementing fancy tools. It's another thing to build a value structure. So what's going to be the newer challenge is, what does customer centricity really means for you as an organization? What are the do's and don'ts across the organization you're going to embed? So when a new technology adoption comes to life, what does that shape into, both from a customer experience, but from an employee experience? Because if the employees are not enabled properly, they will not give the right customer experience. Or when customers don't experience the right things in the way you design the customer journeys, ultimately the employees fails, which essentially in turn actually has an impact to the organization. This shouldn't come as any surprise to anybody, which is the unified data infrastructure, because for lack of better words, and pardon my French here, AI models mostly today, various different large language models, ultimately they are reliant on data. And ultimately what it translates into is shit in, shit out, which essentially does mean that if your quality of data is so bad in the way you are feeding to the models, ultimately what it will serve is going to be a bad experience. So you really have to holistically think and synergize. What does your unified data infrastructure really look like? Sorry, something is frozen. There we go. Cloud native platforms. Now, this is an interesting topic, which probably we'll explore a bit more in the next slide that's coming up. But again, this is something more about how do you actually become or building redundancy on your platform infrastructure. So for me, the cloud nativity is not around the aspect of you are hosting everything in the cloud. It's all more about is that your core infrastructure that you need to service the customer, what is the redundancy that you can actually build using the cloud native platform synergy in general sense. But on the flip side of it is, because you are now using a cloud native infrastructure, how are you actually going to cater to the security requirements? So for example, in Australia, there is more and more regulatory implication on what data is used, what data is shared, how that data is actually used for the customers' data that you are actually taking from customers as part of your interactions and then servicing the customers. This is probably the next two bullet points are probably the most important one for me when it comes to the adoption models. And what I mean really is that the mindset shift is so very important for people. And that can only happen when you actually redesign your operating model as an organization, including your servicing model. So it's one thing from a customer acquisition perspective that you actually drive more modernization. It's another thing is how do you actually start to redesign your workflows, your servicing journey? How do you actually build an operating model which basically is more of a human and AI model interaction, and again ultimately translating into an assisted efficiency. And last but not the least, again, ethical AI standards. I think there is no clear centralized view any organization has yet built because we are all in early stages. Many government organizations from a standardization perspective are looking at it. So if you look at Europe in general, there is a lot more regulatory aspects already evolving when it comes to adoption of AI model. Same is happening in Australia. There is already more focus from government bodies on what does that standard really looks like. So there will be those considerations that you will need to look into. Let's talk about challenges then, because this is a very important one, and this is something that I have personally experienced, right? Is probably most telcos, if not all telcos, one way or the other actually evolved as a result of various different either acquisitions or just the fact that you built your core infrastructure on legacy platforms and then you are trying to evolve into modernized platform. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you literally shut down all of your legacy heritage from an infrastructure, because the principles we have also operated is why fix something which not broken. So I think one of the challenges, especially for AI adoption from a telco perspective, is going to be around what are the constraints you have as a result of all the legacy tech that you actually have inherited. But more importantly, how does that actually integrate into modernization of all your platforms and hence feeding into your AI strategy? Second thing is getting data, storing data is not a problem anymore today. What is still problem is that you have massive amounts of data from various different data sources. How are you actually going to use that data and then cleanse that data to make it usable? Last but not the least is because there is so much of data, and when you're building that as part of your servicing journey, how do you actually reduce latency? On the other side, as I was talking before, customer experience expectations. Trust is a big issue. So you have trust versus loyalty. And if you look at it, telcos actually rank very low when it comes to security and trust. So as a result of that, customer experience and customer engagement is quite low in general for telcos compared to other services organization. Personalization is again a challenging environment, which essentially translates into how do you actually build seamless data flows which are more personalized to a customer's needs. If you then jump a little bit, and I'm going to sort of merge between two topics here. One is your cost and ROI justification, and then your workforce readiness. And why actually it's important is on one side, you have a high cost on investing into technology. It's not just about all your data and everything else. In general, maintaining all your core infrastructure and then basically expanding that infrastructure to build capabilities comes with a high cost. But then ROI essentially translates into the fact is that many of the business cases that are built around these investments don't stand from the aspect of what is the core value then it will generate, or what is the measurable business outcome it will generate. Where that actually then also starts to fail is if you look at it, there is a big skills gap that is evolving. Is many people who have operated on all these legacy platforms, they haven't upskilled themselves. Neither have the organization directly invested in upskilling something people to actually change their mindset. So how do you actually drive that change management or resistance to change and then adoption to the newer technologies? But more importantly, what role now people, which is your employees, actually play a role both from an ethical governance, but also the risk that our organization actually takes. So I think these are the continued challenges when it comes to adoption. But there is one more factor which is quite interesting. And this is, again, data from A.T. Kearney's research. And this is a global research. Now, what you would actually see, which I found it very funny. So if you look by 2030, there is a continued growth and need of just general B2C customer base on the amount of data that they will consume, which means that very data heavy requirements from a consumer space. They want digital customer experiences, which is mostly app led or any digital experience. They are looking for more and more convergence of services. So between fixed and mobility, especially, I think this has become very true post-COVID for many peoples because of the way hybrid ways of working has evolved. Your tiered pricing structure, cost of living is continuing to have pressures across the globe, not just within Australia. But more importantly, when we talk about network resilience, now that actually definition has changed. You can't now very much talk about quality of the voice or how much of data you are actually providing. It's now essentially translating more into is that how does that quality of service and the consistency of service fit within the needs of the customer? So this is essentially, again, going into that value-added services, that when basically there is some problem, how quickly are you actually solving problems for me? Because let's take my own personal example. I have two kids who basically are in high schools. They are heavily reliant on internet, whereas I'm also heavily reliant on internet, but I have a company-provided mobile. So I have a backup option as a consumer, but because of where I work, my wife doesn't. So if there is a network outage or a service completely goes down, while I can do something about my job, all the other three people in my household basically are without a particular service that they need to use. So I think these are some of the personalized experiences that we'll need to really start thinking in how these opportunities can be used. But there is another flip side to it, which I also found very interesting when I was doing this research, is that from a revenue perspective, the growth overall within the telcos globally was very single digit when it comes to consumer. But where it did actually increase is in the B2B space. So if you look at it, almost 27% of telcos B2B revenue involved non-connectivity activities, and yet it contributed to 7% more revenues and margin beyond 2021. And I find that interesting because if you look at it, more and more mobile companies or telco companies, if I want to call it in the context of mobility, the services that actually are utilized from the connectivity aspect of it is from consumer lens, it's very much about consuming data. But from an enterprise services perspective, it is quality of service, which is your core network connectivity. Now it will be over mobile or basically your fixed services or a convergence of that. But the need for B2B, those are evolving. And these are actually also the opportunities which I find quite interesting is evolving in the telco space, where there will be probably rapid opportunities from innovation when it comes to AI. So let's shift the dial a little bit now. Now, this is again from my personal experiences. This may not be true for your organization, but this is more of a thought process I actually wanted to share. Because one of the key things, and look, I have worked in the left side of the organization, right? And this is where I am actually thinking is, what does the shift in operating model really looks like? And if the operating model cannot purely be focused either technology embedment and how the ownership of that comes to life, or basically how you are actually reorganizing the design of the organization. It will need to start actually thinking at the job description level. What does the new job description looks like? So for example, and these are very few examples I wanted to actually bring to life. Predominantly in the old school, you had your chief transformation officer who was very much driving for transformation as an outcome. How do you actually now start to shift to a chief transition officer? if you are saying that the problems can be distributed across the organization, wherein multiple parts of the organization have the accountability to innovate, now a chief transformation officer can actually look at what are all the risk averse investments you are using from that part of your innovation strategy, and then bringing that to life. But at the same time, when and how you actually evolve as an organization and multiple AI models coming to life is what does that distributed AI and monetizing that distributed AI model actually looks for you as an organization. Your old school thinking of program director who was very much focused on the execution planning of it. How do you now translate that into a monetization director? Okay, you are basically piloting various different innovation opportunities, but how do you now take from a pilot to industrialization? How are you actually going to monetize on all these investment in these opportunities, which is essentially not only taking people on the journey, but implementation and embedding that innovation. Last but not the least, which is very true for telco, is you have your operational managers and your product managers who are very siloed and focused on shaping of the products or operational embedment. How do you now change that mindset to product innovation manager or an embedment manager, which is shifting the focus from being purely a product design to actually defining an innovation roadmap at a product level, but at the same time, an operational manager taking that product lens and defining how does embedding that from an operational lens, including the overlap of customer journey, actually comes to life. So again, as I said, this is not something every organization might want to do it, but I think this is more of what is the shift in mindset in how you redesign your operating model needs to look like. So I thought I'll jump quickly into, I'm hoping I have enough time, but I'll jump quickly into some of the opportunities and innovation that's already evolving in the telco organizations or industries in general. And probably more and more organizations are still very much focused on the evolution of high bandwidth connectivity, which is where 5G's evolution will continue. How do you merge edge computing into various use cases? Cloud and network virtualization. How do you actually move towards virtualized infrastructure so that you actually again have a redundancy built into what only not how your infrastructure sit, but how actually employees within your organizations are working. Extending automations to what you might have already invested to how actually you enhance that to basically drive network optimization or predictive maintenance or building personalized customer journeys. IoT, I think a lot of us have talked about it. There is the evolution of it. But when it comes to creating an opportunity or using that opportunity, and this goes back to the previous slide I talked about, when we talk about connected device, where I see there is a larger growth that is still an opportunity for many telcos is what does actually bringing to life IoT with the likes of edge computing, with the likes of 5G, with the likes of all of that coming together, let's say in a mobile private network really looks like. Because you're talking for more B2B organizations or organization who wants to actually have a secure private network wherein they can actually not only deploy their AI agents, but relying on these AI agents to actually do various different autonomous jobs. Last but not the least, I think customer experience. I think there is not enough topic that basically has been not done around customer experience because what it means for every customer is very different. So I think AI is only going to present more opportunities for us in how we actually enhance that experience. But keeping in mind, and I think this is the mind shift that we will actually need, is predominantly our whole of our digitized journeys were very much driven on actually customers sitting and going through an actual journey, browsing the web, for example, or going through an app. Now, if I'm, let's say, using Perplexity or ChatGPT or something else, I haven't actually an agent that I'm actually requesting information or consolidating all of that and going through all those things on the web journey. So now your AI agents or your AI bots or all the tools that you are actually using, they are starting becoming the consumers of this information. So how do you start to think and shift your mindset around that? I'll not deep dive into this slide a little bit more because I want to talk a bit more on what are these actual opportunities are, because I think when it comes to AI, there is definitely, at least in Australia, again, personal experience here, what I'm talking about is because there is such a large scale evolution of various different autonomous organizations that are trying to evolve, more so in the mining sector, I think, is what does that really looks like in a private managed network? And then how do you actually look at opportunities from an automation perspective to fault detection and optimization? Let me bring this one because this is a very classic example I was actually exploring. And again, this is a source of internet that I actually came across, but then used Copilot to help me summarize some of these examples. So everything is true, but the summarization is done by a Copilot. Now, I have probably nearly 10 years back actually worked with a telco wherein predominantly we did a large use case in the mining sector. And the challenges are exactly the same challenges that are described here. Mining is a very harsh environment, which means that having to not only work there, as much possible, autonomous and remote operation is a reality that most mining organizations are looking into, because they do want to actually decrease the risk for human, but at the same time improve efficiency. Then if you look at the digitalization that is happening in the mining, they are already adopting Industry 4.0 technologies, more so in the IoT and the automation and the sensors specifically that are actually built into all these machinery, heavy machinery. But then the mobile private network, all basically a privatized 5G, wherein the network is secure and controlled for their own purposes. It's a very important use case, and why actually it is, if you look at it. So Pivotal, which is predominantly a very, I wouldn't say a mega telco organization, but still an organization which is focused on rural connectivity. What they have actually done is they basically have a mobile private networks that basically has a very secure connectivity from surface to deep underground mining operations. Second thing is they basically have integrated the normalized network to RF radio structures, which again basically blends so that there is a redundancy built into the blind spots. But then when they are thinking about the network design, their network design and capacity planning is very much also using on various different AI agents and the network planning tools and overlaying that information to actually build a network connectivity, which I find it very interesting right now. If you look at Rio Tinto, and again, this is both on Rio Tinto's their own white paper, but essentially a use case that came across is Rio Tinto is already using AI and satellite imaging to rapidly identify mineral deposit with a level of precision that actually is helping them. Rio is big into mining operations. So they are actually very heavily invested on actually building autonomous hauling trucks and optimizing the routes for fuel efficiency using AI algorithms. And then more so, I think this is a very important one, is AI computer vision monitors actually are looking at endangered species near mines and then making sure that their biodiversity protection is actually on top of mind. So it's a very interesting use case for me because on one side it is solving a human problem, it's on the other side looking at biodiversity, and then still actually using technology as a vehicle to actually manage that. Now, I think this is a very probably a repetitive information, but I think again probably a key acknowledgement I wanted to bring is that more and more, if you look across very core native telcos across the world, right, where the risk essentially is that because ROI guarantee, if I want to call it, doesn't really exist for telcos anymore. Because as I said that I think there is this whole shift that has actually occurred wherein telco services are more utilitarian. So many of the time your high capital invest comes with those high risks. is where do you actually decide you actually continuing invest versus where do you stop yourself? Market challenges aside, the regulatory bodies essentially across the world, more and more regulatory requirements, compliance requirements, continue to actually mar many organizations from actually innovating, because it's very hard to sometimes get over the obstacles in the way the definition of these regulatory requirements are. There are more and more revenue opportunities, but at the same time, some of these revenue opportunities requires, again, the same thing, more higher cost in investment, but at the same time, actually creating new innovations that probably somebody has not yet thought about, which does require, again, that upskilling and everything else. So this takes me to more or less, I think, my last slide of it, and then I can hand it over to Rajaji. What does this really mean for you as an organization, but you as a person? And for me, this is very true. Both of these two things are very true, which I personally hold myself accountable for. One thing is, how do you actually go on a journey individually, but as an organization, embedding this mindset around continuous learning and continuous experience? And what I mean by that is, it's one thing to actually learn something. It's another thing to actually experience it, which requires you to actually implement it, try something. Because we as humans have the general tendency, it's one thing we actually learn it, but we don't learn it just because we saw something. We learn better when we start implementing things, and we innovate better when we start implementing things. Then there is a second thing, which is more a mindset thing. Because most transformations I have been part of, right? Because there is a siloed mindset that it's by design that sometimes evolves, and sometimes it is just the natural way it actually evolves, that it creates a siloed structure, which means that there is a thought process that evolves, which is, I am right, I know what I'm doing, and because I'm the central part of the transformation office, let's say, and then sort of you, without unknowingly or knowingly, you start actually disengaging people or including them into part of the decision making. So this is essentially more of a mindset statement for me, is that if you really want a transformation agenda to come to life, you also personally need to also think this whole mantra that I really love is that everyone is right, but they are not fully right. Because it's a perspective thing. You have a set of information and you use that information. So you might be right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody else is not right. It's more about where the perspectives are sitting. And in the same context, everyone is wrong, but they are not fully wrong. They might actually have a perspective that they share. Just because you have a different perspective doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's wrong and you are right. It's essentially coming to an agreement on who or what information that you're using to enable a decision making. And I think that's the messaging I really wanted to get across, is that transformation agendas don't fail. What actually starts to fail is engagement of people and the market requirements, because the customer needs are actually continuously changing as well. So you're always going to play a catch-up model. But the only way probably you can actually arrive at a conclusion to sort of play that catch-up, but essentially continue the innovation journey, is that engagement model in how you are interacting within the teams as individuals and how you're actually driving the decision making as you go on the innovation path. That's pretty much what I really wanted to share. So thank you again, Rajaji, for this opportunity to be able to share some of my insights and my learnings. And what do you?
Thanks, Arun, for that comprehensive journey through the disruption and innovation, how the new waves of AI is going to be approached for the transformation agenda. From a CEO's perspective, from the business perspective, from the business from B2B, how it offers opportunity, and what kind of cultural mindset which are required, and how the continuous learning and the skilling, and even to the extent of having a startup and startup ecosystem build up needs to be looked upon. It's a multidimensional problem, is what when we listen to you and hear you saying, it occurs to us, all of us. And I see some common pattern of question coming up. and maybe I'll take few of them now.
Sure.
So when we listened to you, you had gone through multiple transformation program and challenges and solutions, and the AI and Gen AI is coming into the vogue. How they are going to alter the challenges and problems, and how it is going to facilitate a faster resolution, and your comments and recommendations.
I think it's a very interesting topic, right? Because, and I think this is what I was trying to even present in my presentation as such in general, is that if you look at the transformation agenda, the problem statements that we are trying to solve are not different. We haven't found any new problems to solve. Either the same problem statement has now become bigger, or we are basically, because we have now, let's say, from a legacy platform transition to something, we have replaced one problem statement with a new problem statement. So previously, let's say, knowledge of automation tools was not a core requirement for jobs to make the transformation successful. Now it is something that you require as a minimum from even just experiential aspect of it, even though the person might not need to do the job. So I think where I see that whole of this essentially is translating into is that probably flipping the question, right, is that if our problem statements have not changed, innovation is continuing to actually happen, which is where I see AI and the agentic AI essentially being now newer tools available to us as individuals and as organizations. And then as a result of this, our lives are evolving because the newer technologies are giving newer opportunities to actually explore. The amalgamation of three still basically means the same thing. As humans, we are basically wanting simpler journeys for us. We don't want to be on, I don't know, a 10-hour call with a customer service agent, or we don't want to basically every day have to go and talk to somebody that why is my bill wrong. So I think from a customer or human needs perspective, we are all becoming very time restrained. So which means that we want our experiences when we interact with the organization to be seamless. On the flip side, especially I think it's more true for telcos, so I wouldn't comment on other industries. Because there is a shift from an operating model to how most telcos operated to what is now required. Being utilitarian does require now to actually you have to start thinking as a startup. How do you scale down and scale up at the same time? What does shifting your operating model really looks like, where you are actually on one side scaling down, not from what infrastructure you have built, but essentially in the way your processes and everything has evolved, you're trying to scale down and then scale up because you want to be able to innovate and use newer tools. So I think it's more mindset shift that basically needs to now evolve, which again, it's not something that an individual can do on their own. I think it's an organizational now responsibility at some level. How do you actually continue to upskill? And it's going to be, at the risk of sort of sounding very, I don't know what I'm going to sound like, is that it's a community responsible now for an organization. Yes, you might actually upskill for somebody to leave the organization, but what you are still actually end up going to do is add knowledge, add skills to the market, which hopefully in turn, maybe to another organization benefit, yes, but basically starts building capability, which at the same time, it's going to happen with some other organization doing the same, and you basically acquire those resources. So I think that's why this whole continuous learning and continuous experience is very important for me, is that it needs to now be part of the organization DNA if you really want capability to evolve for people.
Yeah, thank you for that, Arun. So I keep multiple time when I hear you talking about the emphasis on the simplicity from the customer standpoint, be it on the service delivery or be it about the frictionless experience, the quality of the experience, how the AI and Gen AI and then some of the technology adoptions like 5G, cloud native, how all of these things comes in and comes around? Is there any specific amplification from that standpoint, from a customer at center?
Look, I think so. This is a very interesting problem to solve for telcos, right? Because again, this is probably goes back to my previous point as well. Is from a customer needs perspective, how you are solving the problem, it's not their issue. What they have is their basic needs. Yesterday it was 4G, now there is 5G. What the customers really essentially want is quality of service, and network guarantee is the evolving theme, which is essentially translates from an organizational perspective, your network resilience. So I think this is the opportunity where, especially with the evolution of AI, I think there is a lot of possibilities. How do you actually look at your network operation centers, network operation centers in the context of automations, not from decisioning, but from automation, is that when you have failure points actually happening various parts of your network, how are you actually building resilience into your network to automatically switch to a fallback or a redundancy network, but at the same time driving a customer experience which clearly articulates that, let's say the failover is going to take maybe 2 minutes of time. I have very proactive communication saying that there are issues, or basically there is a heavy reliance on particular network area, and then you basically are going to have a switch of experience. But you are being proactive about it, as opposed to now customers don't know what has happened and they don't have any service. I think the same thing is going to be at the BSS and the orchestration level, is when things don't go to the plan. So for example, you're going to upgrade your network, and you have possibility that things will not always go to the plan. So what can be a virtual network environment look like, wherein these AI agents now I'm going to talk about can actually use what you really want to do, actually continuously deploying to a virtual network environment to test the resilience of various different scenarios, including the security concerns, before you truly deploy into your network or your core OSS, which then ultimately turns into the network guarantee and the network resilience what the customers is looking for. But then there is a third layer, and I think this is the most challenging layer of it, is that a lot of organizations have heavily invested from a digitalization perspective and from a personalization perspective. So if you today, without a mobile app, you are not an organization that basically exists for many customers. Why? Because they want to be digitally interacting with you. And preferably their mode of interaction is first through your mobile app. Second is through a digital channel. It might be a chatbot interaction. It might be on Facebook. If you have a WhatsApp channel, through some digital mechanism. It's only the last protocol that they will look at is I have to call you. But behaviorally, if you look at it, they are happy to interact on these first two channels because they chose it. The third channel, when they have to actually call you, they don't have a choice. Most of the time, they are then already calling you with a level of frustration, which means that now your process has to be so, not only that omni-channel experience doesn't really now mean anything different other than, okay, I have a problem. How can you quickly solve that problem for me as a consumer or a customer? And I can give you one example if you don't mind. I recently I will not name the company, but I have a recent interaction with a online portal, or essentially a tool where you can trade different things. I traded a particular equipment, and then things didn't really go to plan because the servicing fee that was being charged to me was nearly 15% higher than what I actually had signed up for. Long story short, I basically had no other choice but to basically lodge a complaint, thinking that it will be a quick one, because that's how my previous experiences were. Now I raised it. I basically ended up interacting with a chatbot. The chatbot pretty much basically again kept on doing the same generic responses without taking the context of the problem I was trying to solve. ultimately 3 or more of the 4 times I was then forced to, I want to talk to a human. Getting to a human was a challenge, but the human didn't really interact with me from an omni-channel experience. He didn't even read through the problem statement. So I had to re-explain everything as part of my now verbal interaction. And I had to do it 5 times this. So if you can imagine the amount of frustration. So I think this is the challenge that, again, I'm putting from a telco lens. That's you will need to actually look and solve for.
Absolutely. So one last question. This is coming up. The data privacy concerns versus database decisions and database preferences. So how about your thoughts and comments on data sovereignty, cloud sovereignty, AI sovereignty in the telcos? There's a lot of movements happening. And it's also seen as a bigger issue for B2B business from a data and cloud sovereignty and AI sovereignty perspective. So, any comments and thoughts from your side?
Look, so I'll firstly acknowledge, right, I'm not a core data guy, so I wouldn't want to comment that I know it or understand it. But let me put a lens from a different context, right? Because I think this is still, now when it comes to data, most of the time, basically today, all the personalization journeys that the way digitally we have evolved, and it's not by direct consolidation of what you would have built in the journeys. It's through third-party data aggregation that you still inherit various different data sets. Ultimately comes down to all the level of information that for you as a consumer, it's out there with you as essentially a company or an organization. And you can use that data to your choosing. But on the flip side of it is, because this data is so readily available, one is, how do you protect the customer data? Because security is a key concern. And where it actually is the important aspect of it is, it's not just the personal data. It's the data wherein it's about their payment information, their historical way. Again, so for example, vulnerable customers is quite a important theme that you need to start looking into. Is that if you are in, let's say, a relationship that has broken off, you have a historical information available about that customer. And how do you put a customer in that situation as a result of that? Because now you're using that data, which basically is historical but not contextual. So I think when it comes to data sovereignty and AI sovereignty, for me, everything comes down to is that it's one thing to actually have that capability. It's another thing to actually take this into a layered problem statement. If you're going to put from a customer experience perspective, customer first, you have to think like a customer first, which is how do you build trust in how you are storing a customer data? Second thing, when and if you're storing that data, what is the mechanism? And this comes down to the sovereignty aspect of it. What are the guardrails you're actually putting to make sure that that data is not only secure, but is masked in a way that even if, let's say, because you have to always assume the worst, even if I get hacked, that data that gets stolen doesn't really detrimentally impact the customer. And I think with the evolution of AI, and I think this is going to be the most critical aspect of it, because I think I repetitively said is that as this evolution happens, wherein now customers are using AI agents to actually interact with so many different data sources. So now the learning models from AI are already encompassing that customer information, but now they are actually sourcing the data from various differences. How do you actually make sure that this interaction model doesn't end up in a way that somebody else can actually build an intelligent, let's say, a bot, AI agent, which is now not using this data for the right reason, but for the wrong reason, from scamming the customers to being something very detrimental to the customer.
Thanks, Arun, and great for bringing in the element of trust and then suitable guardrails when the huge source of data are going to be flowed through multiple agents and then machine learning models. I think that becomes a very
I think
tantamount for building the architect built on.
One of the key things, right, and for me, comes down to both AI sovereignty and data sovereignty. Is the aspect is that the evolution of the way the adoption of AI tools is going to come to life, it will be very different for different organizations. But I think where we might end up with risks is wherein you are heavily invested on one particular, let's say, AI tool, and that tool actually having excessive access to the data, especially customer data. So where does your ethical and the overarching governance will evolve from not only data standards, but the decision making, which within this whole distributed LLM model, and hence basically the evolution of agentic AI and hence the AI agents itself, where and how has the supervisor controls on what data is used when and how exactly is that data then being utilized to do as an action, more so for agentic AI and AI agents, I think.
Great, Arun. I think that kind of logically brings our session to the conclusion. And once again, thanks a lot for giving a comprehensive and ringside view of how the disruption can be a catalyst for a transformation agenda and for an innovation journey for the telco and telco perspective. And thank you again. Thanks for participants. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajaji, and thank you to the Tata Elxsi team.